Okay, I think we're live. Let me just double check here.
Yeah, it says we're live.
Yep, says we're live.
If you guys can see us, let us know in the chat.
Yep, make sure the volume's good and everything. So Tim and I weren't able to get together this week, so we're trying something a little bit different using a application for live streaming. So if we're having any issues with audio, video, anything like that, let us know so that way we can try and fix it on the fly. That way it doesn't sound like garbage, because we never want that. That'll be terrible things to happen. So but aside from that, today we are going to be talking about the aquarium industry overcomplicating the aquarium hobby. I thought this was something that would be pretty good to talk about. There's a lot of stuff that I see nowadays that a lot of these companies are putting out and having advertisements out about some products that they put out and equipment that they put out that they're nice, but they're definitely not needed. And that would be overcomplicating things, right? So I have a whole list of things that we can talk about, basically breaking down the whole aquarium setup and different things that go into that, where it's going to, one, help you save money, two, help you be successful by not overcomplicating the aquarium, and three, basically make it more enjoyable for yourself because you're going to be able to save money and make it easier on yourself overall. Do you have any general thoughts about that?
Well, I definitely think there's a number of areas that you definitely see some, especially when it comes to like things like filtration, where, like some of the industry is just selling you stuff you just don't need. Whether it's overfiltration, whether it's, you know, what materials you need for filtration, things like that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're told like, oh, you can only grow plants with planted lights, and we did a fisher tour at your house the other week, and clearly you got some plants growing behind you, and those are definitely far from the lights that they want to try to sell you. So I think that's, you're absolutely right. Like you can pretty much find any area, and it's like, yeah, you could do it that way. It's not necessarily a bad thing to do sometimes. Although I would say with like the cartridges they use for their filters, the hang back filters, I'd say like don't even use those. That's a bad idea. So not only do I think they overcomplicated it, I think they've actually made it so that it's worse in some ways.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely I agree with you, and so I'm kind of excited about talking today, and especially going through. I'm glad to hear you thought through, because there was a few things I thought of, but I'm not feeling so great today, so it was hard for me to think a whole lot on it. But
Yeah, and we kind of threw this thing together last minute. So I made a quick list of everything we got here. So yeah, like usual. So we'll go ahead and open this up, and I'll just list off the topics that we're going to be talking about, and then we'll go ahead and we'll go through them and talk about them a little bit. So in general, your aquarium is just a glass box, right? It doesn't really matter who the manufacturer is. They're all going to hold water for the most part when they're coming new. But you have just your general standard aquarium like these right here. They got your frame on top and bottom. You've got rimless, you've got frameless, you have specialty ones like you've got your bow fronts and whatever. Most of those aquariums are pretty much out of the box fine. There's nothing wrong with them. Choose whatever size you want, choose how much you want to spend on it. That's completely up to you. But generally speaking, they're pretty much all going to be the same quality wise. Aside from that, we're going to be talking about substrates. We're going to be talking about plants, whether you want to use real ones or fake ones, and what you can do to help yourself, especially with like beginner plants, because the industry's now put out a ton of aquarium related plants, and I'd say probably 50% of the ones you see in the stores are going to require some kind of CO2 injection, but they don't tell you that. So you're going to have to do your research on that before you get your plants, because a lot of the ones that they have out nowadays they're not beginner friendly, right? So in addition to that, we're going to be talking about fertilizers, whether you should or shouldn't be using fertilizers, whether you should be using root tabs, liquid fertilizers, dry fertilizers, which ones are better in what situation. We're going to be talking about lighting, like you talked about. Filtration, that's probably one of the biggest ones that aggravates me is filtration. Just because of what they have out there, the amount of money that these things cost, and what they actually do, and what you're getting for what money you're spending. That one probably bothers me the most out of all of them. We're going to be talking about heaters. We're going to be talking about medications. And pretty much in my mind, that's basically like an aquarium, right? So you're going to have all those things to have a full setup aquarium, aside of fish, right? But fish is totally up to you. That's your choice. And quality is going to come from the store that you're buying from or the website that you're buying from. So really, the choice on fish is kind of more in your control, versus what you get from these aquarium companies, right? So you have anything that you think we should add into that?
I think you just about covered everything. So I think, yeah, nothing that comes to the top of my mind. I'm sure as we talk about different things, we might think of something else. But I think the fact that we're having a wide variety of topics there, I think we're going to cover most of it. So,
okay. So we'll start right from the bottom. So basically, like if we were going to be building an aquarium, and setting one up, we're going to go forward from that. So, like I said, whatever aquarium you want to get, whether you want a 5.5 gallon, 72-gallon bow front, 5,000 gallon aquarium, whatever you want, that's up to you. So we're going to talk substrate. And the big thing that, in my eye, that I want to talk about is don't overspend on planted substrates, right? There's a lot of substrates out there from companies. And I even did some experimenting with some. I went out, it was like $30 a bag for like 25 pounds of EcoComplete. And essentially they claim that it's got nutrients packed in it already, and they've got it in a liquid that takes the beneficial bacteria and basically puts it in a hibernative state until you add water to it, and then it brings it back to life, and all this different stuff. But based on the research that I've done on it, it has very minimal nutrition in it already. So you're going to have to add your nutrients to it, and it's actually going to hold on to the nutrients that you add to it very well, until the plants need it. And as the roots go into the substrate, it's going to pull that nutrition out of that substrate. But it doesn't come with anything. You still have to add it in there. And as far as that goes, it's very expensive for what you get. It's essentially crushed slate and lava rock is basically what it is. It's just crushed up real fine. And there's a lot cheaper options out there that are basically going to be the same thing. And
yeah, and it's funny because I think with that, specifically, to me, you're also losing some of the benefits. Like lava rock is an awesome thing to have in your aquarium, but when you crush it up, you've actually just lost one of the benefits of having lava rock in your aquarium. So a lot of people, with that one in particular, yes, it holds the nutrients, which is great. There's some good things about it. It's a little bit difficult to plant. I've had it before myself, and it's not my favorite thing to plant. It's not the worst one by any means, but it's not my favorite to plant. And when you take that lava rock and you crush it up, like you actually taking away some of the benefits of it. So yeah, I think that's a good one you're talking about. And if you guys aren't aware, so when you have lava rock in your aquarium, one of the things that it can actually do, if you have large enough pieces, is it actually can do what's called denitrification, where it actually takes not only basically the center of that rock, there's very little flow, and it develops a bacteria in there that actually consumes nitrates just like your plants would, which is awesome. That's awesome from a rock, but not when you break it up and there's not that thick center where the water is really barely getting to. So yeah, absolutely, that's one of those. It's an okay thing. It's not the worst thing out there by any means, but that's one of the substrates. I also used some fluval stratum, and I think there are certain cases where it makes sense to use some of those other substrates and things of that nature, but they're not nearly as often as people are thinking. If all you're putting in your tank is plants and fish, you probably don't need a lot of those other substrates. Unless, and even if your water's way off parameter wise, you think like, oh, I'm going to use it to buffer my pH, or I'm going to use it to adjust my levels You know, some of that stuff is okay. It'll do that for a little while, but it doesn't necessarily do that long term. So you're really you're going to struggle with that anyways. And so you might just think like instead of trying to chase a pH level, maybe I just need to look into different fish or shrimp or whatever it is you're looking for.
Right. And now, don't get me wrong, there are some of the planted substrates that actually do have all the nutrients in there already preset, ready to go. Like, but you're looking, it's going to be more expensive for smaller bags. And like one of the ones that comes to my head right away is like ADA Aqua Soil, right? So like that's a really good one. But when it comes to like fluval stratum, it's basically about the same as like EcoComplete is. But fluval stratum is going to lower pH. It's going to buffer that down quite a bit. But still basically the same principle. And there's definitely options out there that you can grow plants in that are going to be way more affordable. And my couple of my favorite ones, like absolute favorite, is Black Diamond Blasting Sand from Tractor Supply. It's a coal slag, right? So you've got coal slag in there. They've got little bits of iron in there. It doesn't compact when it gets wet. So roots are able to really grow out and get their feelers out there and pick up all the fish mulm that collects down in the sand and the substrate down there. And plants are going to do really well in it. They grow very well in my experience. I think I have Black Diamond Blasting Sand in probably all but 2 of my aquariums right now, and plants love it, right? Like I haven't put fertilizer in any of these tanks behind me in probably months, right? So, and the plants are doing really well. Now, aside from the little bit of iron that's in there, which is going to be really good for like Amazon swords and stuff like that, you're not going to have to add any like nutrition supplements for iron for those. Like, what do I usually put in there if I'm running low? Like red clay capsules, I'll put those in there for a little bit of iron supplementation. But Black Diamond Blasting Sand, pool filter sand, right? You can go to a pool supply store and get 50 pounds of it for $10. Black Diamond Blasting Sand's 50 pounds for like $8 or $9.
Yeah, and if you
Or
go to
just
the I
what's
was gonna
that?
say if you go to like PetSmart or Petco and buy 50 pounds of sand, it's going to cost you, you know, 3 times as much. And so, yeah,
Oh,
they're
absolutely.
definitely
The sand there is ridiculous.
yeah,
I think they sell them. I was just looking the other day. It was like $20 for 15 pounds or 10 pounds of it. And you can go spend $10, get 50 pounds of it, and 50 pounds in a 55-gallon aquarium will give you like an inch and a half of sand. And that's like perfect, right? And it's only $10. And if you absolutely are completely dedicated to you want to grow plants, but you have like aquarium gravel and you don't want to, or you're not sure that you want to switch out to sand, you can grow plants and gravel just as good as anything else. You know, as long as your tank is established and you have some fish mulm built up in the bottom, and even if you don't, you could use some supplementation on those plants. You can use a liquid fertilizer, light dosing, very light dosing. And I think that's something that somebody was talking about before, where they think they don't want to use liquid fertilizers, but um, if you read the standard dosing on the liquid fertilizers, don't do a standard dose because they're assuming that you have a heavily planted aquarium. Do like a quarter of that to start, right? And then dose a quarter and then watch and see if your deficiencies or if your algae issues are going away or if you're having any improvement in your plants, right? But one thing I do want to touch on that, since we've gotten a bunch more comments here, is we are going to go back through all the comments and we're going to touch on all of those. Once we're done, we're basically going to do a main talk here for about 30 minutes or so, and then we're going to go back through all the comments, answer questions, and everything like that. So don't think we're ignoring you guys. Definitely not doing that. We just want to get our talk out of the way first. But yeah, like aquarium substrates, you can get them way cheaper than what they have at the pet stores, and they work way better most of the time, right? And you're going to
yeah,
save yourself the money on the substrate that you can turn around and put into plants,
yeah.
right?
Especially that Black Diamond Blast sand. I agree with you wholeheartedly on that one. That's probably about the only thing I'll be using now. Sometimes I'll use it as a cap on other stuff.
Yep.
You know, if I am trying to get some of that, you know, maybe I am doing something with shrimp or something like that. But even then, I still use the Black Diamond Blasting Sand. And so, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. Definitely a much better way to go than a lot of those aquarium substrates.
For sure. Do you have anything else you want to put in on substrate?
I think you covered a lot of it. I mean, we did talk before in our last live stream about even using like dirt from outside, and there's some things you could do with that. Now, that's one you definitely can save money doing it, but you're gonna have to be really careful and know what you're doing. But that is another option for you to save money is go ahead and use some of the dirt from outside. But just know you are taking some chances when you do that.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, that's something else that I wanted to talk about too. You reminded me was basically a lot of people know it as the wallstad method, which is just organic soil capped with sand, right? So that is probably the single best planted substrate you could ever have, because that is essentially 100% natural. And if you're wondering what the difference is between regular soil and organic soil, right? The difference is regular soil, they add in nitrogen, potassium, and phosphate, which is your NPK that you see on the bags. Usually is like 10, 15, 10, or 10, 10, 10. So those three numbers that you see. But that's added in. So that's for if you're going to use that outside. Organic potting soil, which is what you see a lot of people talk about when it comes to dirted aquariums, is essentially just compost. There's nothing added to it. You've got your greens and your browns, which is essentially like grass and leaves, right? And it's composted down, it turns into dirt, and then you use that. And there's enough nutrition in that for your aquatic plants. Usually I see aquariums go for about 2 years before they have to be stripped down and redone. Or if you don't want to strip it down, at that point you could start reintroducing root tabs, maybe a little bit of liquid fertilizer if you really need to. Or the thing I see people do all the time is they take ice cube tray and they'll put soil in the ice cube tray and then wet it and freeze it. And then you can take little soil pods and push it back down under your cap to reintroduce fresh soil back into your dirted aquarium. So there's a little tip for you. But yeah, I think that kind of covers substrates. So next thing up from substrate, we're probably going to talk about is plants. And this is probably a topic that you're going to be very interested in. I know you love your plants. But like I was talking about before, start off with easy plants and do your research, right? So if you're brand new to the plant world, right, you're going to want to start off with plants that are easy. And there's quite a few that are easy. Just in general, Amazon swords, cryptocorns, Anubias, Java fern, Anacharis, jungle val, like things like that are going to be growing really easy. No CO2, no extras, no nothing. You put them in an aquarium with some water and some fish, and they're going to grow 95% of the time. But like I was talking about, the key is making sure you do the research on the plant. Like if you're in a fish store and you're looking at a plant and you're like, huh, that looks neat, look it up, see what it needs. Because some plants need super high lighting and some of them need almost no lighting. Like one of the plants that I actually gave you some subwassertang.
Yep.
And I don't know if you've noticed, but if you put it under high light, it doesn't grow real well. If you put it in almost darkness, it grows like crazy. And that's just because it's creating more of itself to absorb the light that's there. And that's just the way that plant works. So definitely research the plant before you buy it so you know what it needs. Also, you want to look up where it's going to get that nutrition from, whether it's going to be from the substrate like an Amazon sword, or if it's going to get it from the water column primarily like Anacharis and Anubias, plants like that. So what are your thoughts on plants?
Yeah, I think, especially if you're getting new, learning about those plants in particular is really important. So often I see people who get Java fern and they get it in their tank and then it gets all these black dots and starts dying. And they're like, oh no, my Java fern's dying. What do I do to fix it? And the reality is you don't fix it. It dies. And then you get a bunch of new plants. So those black dots, those are going to grow roots and leaves. And then you've got, instead of one plant, you've got 20 plants. But so often it's that learning curve of like, oh, I don't know what's wrong with this. Maybe I need to add some nutrients to the water, or maybe I need to change my lighting. But the reality is when plants hit your water, almost all of them are going to go through a process of change. So cryptocorns, they'll completely die off for the most part. Every once in a while, you might be able to keep a few that stick around, and then they're going to regrow, and they might look completely different, a different color. A lot of times you'll see like Amazon swords, same thing, right? They have a very different leaf shape when they're grown out of water than in water. And typically, when you're buying them, you've bought them from someplace that grew them out of water. And so yeah, I yes, make sure you do your research, make sure you learn about them. As far as I'm concerned, probably the easiest plant to put into your tank and not worry about is Anubias, because that looks the same. You don't have that changeover process growing from in water to out of water, and vice versa. So that one's definitely a really good one to start with. The other thing I would say, and this is part of the reason it's really important, there's a lot of plants that some of these fish stores sell that are not meant to go in your aquarium. PetSmart drives me nuts because they sell this stuff, Mondo grass. And Mondo grass, when they sell it, is in an aquarium. And if you take it home and put it in your aquarium, it's going to die because it doesn't grow under the water like that. I don't know why they sell it like that. It's a ripoff. Like,
Yeah,
do not buy Mondo grass.
yeah, I
And then
noticed a
also,
lot of those on. Hey, Dustin, what's up? Yeah, I noticed a lot of those plants that they sell in the tubes. About 50% of the ones you see in the fish store say semi-aquatic. And
yeah,
basically what that means is semi-aquatic plant is you could put that, if you have a hang-on back filter, you could stick it back there and it'll grow probably pretty well. But if you're going to try and put it in your aquarium, it's not going to grow. So, and probably 90% of those plants that you get in those tubes from like Petco, PetSmart, Pet Supplies, plus your chain stores, they're going to be immerse grown, and you're going to have to convert them over to submerged grown. So like you were saying, basically what you're buying in that sense is the root system, because whatever the plant looks like in that tube is not what it's going to look like in about 2 weeks. It's going to almost completely die off and then have to grow back. Now, that being said, here's something I kind of think about if I go and I have to buy those tubes for plants, don't buy the big ones. The big ones, you're going to pay $15 for a tube for a single Amazon sword plant that's grown this big, right? And it's got this big spade leaves on it. And as soon as you put it in your aquarium, it's all going to die off.
yep.
And then you're going to be left with new leaf growth that's only this big. So whether you buy the big plant or the small plant, you're going to have to start over anyway. So just buy the small one for like $3, right? There's no sense in buying that big one. You're just wasting money.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I think that kind of covers the plants section.
Well, I'd say the
So
only other thing with plants, if you guys like go to your Facebook marketplace, there's constantly people who are selling plants that are aquarium plants in the hobby. You're gonna be able to find them cheaper. They're gonna be grown under the water. They convert to your water a whole lot better. So just or go to fish swaps or things like that. But I think a lot of times people who are new to the hobby don't know about fish swaps, but everybody knows about Facebook Marketplace. So yeah, go there, and then find some plants there and meet some other aquarists, in the process.
yeah, definitely. Or like your local Facebook groups, like me and Tim have the one for Pennsylvania. We run probably the largest Pennsylvania aquarium group on Facebook. And there's people on there moving plants all the time, stuff like that. And then we even have a sister group on Band for moving fish. But if you can get your stuff local, it's way better and probably cheaper than getting it through a pet store, right? It's going to be healthier because it's going to be already established with the local water that you have. And overall, you'll probably have more success with it. Yeah, tissue culture is good too, because you're basically starting off fresh, right? It's going to become completely adapted to your water structure. All right, so moving on from plants, the next thing that plants need is going to be fertilizers, right? And there's a lot of debate online when you go on these fish groups of what aquarium fertilizer is the better one, whether it's the full line of Seachem, which is going to run you like $100 to get everything, or Thrive, or Aquarium Co-op's Easy Green, or any of them, right? And they're all going to have their little differences. If you look at the ingredients on them, they're all going to be a little bit different, claiming that, oh, we're better because of this, or we're better because of this. But if you already have an established aquarium and you're adding plants to it, chances are you don't need to have all these fertilizers adding to your aquarium all the time. most of what you're going to get, the fish mulm, which is the poop that breaks down and rests in your substrate, is going to feed your root feeding plants primarily. And then any nitrate that's going to be in your water is going to feed your water column feeding plants. So unless you're starting out 100% brand new, you probably don't need all these fertilizers. Or if you're doing a ton of water changes, keeping your water absolutely pristine with zero nitrate, then you might need it then too, right? So, but for most aquarium keepers, probably not something you're going to have to be dosing all the time, right? Or adding into your substrate all the time. It's really like, I think I bought a bottle of Easy Green probably a year and a half ago, and it's still half full. And I've got 22 planted aquariums. You know, so it's not something that you're going to need to run out and buy, and you have to have it. You know, it's good to have on hand, but you know, it's not something that you're going to have. And as far as that goes, is there a best one? Probably not. You know, like, it's just, if you have a fertilizer you can add if you need it, that's good enough. Realistically, you know, you probably don't have to run out and buy the best one. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. I for the most part, I'm going to recommend people go with the all-in-ones, because the reality is, like, yes, if you've been doing plants for a long time, and you really can start to cue into, oh, my plant is lacking a little bit of this or a little bit of that, like, yeah, okay, maybe you can really dial in, but the percentage of people who can do that is so small when it comes to the aquarium hobby. Like, we are fish keepers. And some of us really enjoy keeping plants, but not even all of us enjoy that, right? So, you know, when you're talking about that, yes, there are those people out there who, yep, go ahead. You really specialize. You have absolutely some of the most beautiful planted tanks you've ever seen in plants that I can't keep. That, you know, the majority of people out there can't keep. Well, yeah, go ahead and get very specific, you know, with your fertilizers. But for the most part, those all-in-ones are going to include all the fertilization you need for the majority of the plants that are in the hobby, that are regularly in the hobby anyways, that you can find easily, that type of idea.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree. And like, the other thing that comes down to, like, if you're going to be doing, so say you have the C-Chem line and you've purchased all 30 bottles of whatever you need to buy to have the full line of aquarium nutrition. You can also have issues with nutrient lockout, where if you overdose one nutrient, you can have other nutrients not, the plants won't be able to take up other nutrients because you have an excess of one nutrient, right? So it's one of those things that, like you always say in the aquarium hobby, don't chase numbers. Like, if you're chasing pH numbers or nitrate numbers, or like, don't be a number chaser, right? And it's the same thing with fertilizer. You don't want to be a chaser, because you're going to end up causing more problems than you already have. And it's just one of those things that takes time, and usually it sorts itself out in the end, without having to have any kind of personal intervention with it. All right. Any final thoughts before we move on?
The only other thing I would say with the fertilizer, and I'll only mention because I don't think we talked about it before, you can also do root tabs for adding to your substrate. You know, Travis mentioned taking soil and freezing it, and that's a cheaper way of doing it. Some people just, you know, if you're in the middle of the city, don't have access to something like that, then you can do root tabs. And basically what root tabs are is dirt, you know, with some nutrients in it. So, you know, that is another option, you know, for those, you know, if you're seeing those plants, especially the ones that are more the root feeders, those Amazon sorts, things of that nature, then yeah, go ahead, get some root tabs. You can always add those. But again, I'm, you know, on the same boat as far as Travis. You don't need a lot of them. And if you're having a bunch of fish in your tank and you're vacuuming your substrate while you're trying to grow plants, stop that. Because all of that mulm is going to build up for you and provide a lot of those nutrients that your fish are going to need anyways. So that is one of those, I think a lot of, especially for beginner plant keepers, a lot of people make that mistake of, oh, I've got to, you know, get all the fish poop out of here. Well, look at some of the tanks that are the best well-grown tanks you've seen, and they've got tons of mulm that's still sitting in there. You can see it building up in those layers. And so that's, you know, now if you only have one fish, you probably aren't going to have enough mulch in there to build up. But if you have several fish in there, yeah, then absolutely you can probably avoid using those root tabs as well.
Yeah, like my 125-gallon aquarium, that thing's fully planted out. There's probably 80 fish in there. And since I've moved all those fish in there, I've never added root tabs. I've never added any liquid fertilizers, nothing. And all the plants are doing fantastic, right? So it's not something that you need consistently. It's just something once in a while if you know you're running low. So the next thing that we're going to move on to is going to be lighting. And this is probably one of the ones that I see people talking about the most, like, oh, you need to get this this current USA light, or you have to get the newest Phoenix light, or you have to get the newest Kessel LED pod, or whatever, right? And all of these lights are going to run like $100 to $300, sometimes more, depending on whatever, right? Most of my tanks that I'm growing plants in, I'm running LED shop lights and under cabinet lights from Walmart, right? So you got to think, like, back when planted aquariums first started becoming a thing, right? Like back in the late 70s, early 80s, they didn't have LED lights. They didn't have high power lighting for aquariums. They had T12 and T8 bulbs, fluorescence, right? And most of those put out around the light spectrum of 3400 Kelvin. So very yellow. That's usually about the lighting that you have in your house. It's like a soft white is what they would consider it. So it's a very yellowish orange light, and they grew plants with that perfectly fine, right? So, and we could still do that today, and it does work. Plants aren't going to grow as fast, but they're still going to grow, right? So a lot of the stuff that I see online, another thing that people talk about is, oh, you need to have 6,500 Kelvin to 7,500 Kelvin is the ideal range. And yeah, I would say that's the ideal range. When you go outside and you look at natural sunlight, it ranges anywhere from 5,000 to 7,500. So anywhere in there is going to be an ideal range. So as long as you have enough light, doesn't matter what color it is, as long as you have enough, your plants are going to grow well. So you could run anywhere from 3,400 to 10,000 Kelvin. I've got a tank out in my living room with a cheap NiCrew light on it that's 10,000 Kelvin. And usually 10,000 is what they use in like saltwater aquariums, that very high-end spectrum. And it grows freshwater plants perfectly fine. And these lights behind me are 5,000 Kelvin, and that grows plants perfectly fine. So as long as you have enough light to reach your plants, they're going to grow, right? The issue that you're going to run into is if you have very dense planting, right, all your plants that are going to be up top are going to get all the light, and a lot of the stuff below is going to get shaded out. So that's one thing that you could play with your lighting, where you could actually have a main light on top and the back of the aquarium, and then add supplemental lighting to the front that goes down into the back. That way you're not getting all that shading and shadowing out of all your plants, because plants tend to get a little bit stringy when they don't have all that light. They lose all their leaves on the lower end. But for the most part, any light will work to grow aquarium plants. You don't have to go out and spend thousands of dollars on lighting unless you want to, right? So I don't know. That's just my 2 cents on it. I've experimented with it. I've done quite a bit of research on it, and that's just what I do.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I've got 5,000 watt, 5,000 Kelvin shop light on my 75-gallon tank, and that's probably got my best plant growth out of any of my tanks. And I've got the Fluval 3.0 in a different tank, and I've got so I've got different lights that they're more expensive, that's for sure, and they can be adjusted more, and that's nice. But yeah, like sometimes it's just a matter of get the light on there. And it's funny because you did talk about earlier you're talking about subwasser tank. Well, some plants don't even want that much light, and they seem to grow better with a little bit less light. I find that's probably true with things like that, Anubias, even some crypts. Like depending on which ones they are, some of them just don't want as much light, as you would think. And so, yeah, you can get away with a lot of stuff. Now there's people who know a lot more about plants than I will probably ever know in my entire life. And I'm thinking of one particular, Karen Randall. She is, she writes books, and I actually recommend one of the books she has. I think it's called Aquatic Gardens or Secret Gardens, or I don't remember off the top of my head, but she talks about lighting, and she says, you should have at least 100 par, par is how you actually measure the amount of light.
Yeah, I
Sunken
believe
gardens,
it's photosynthetic active or available radiation is what that is, I believe.
Anyways, here's the book I was talking about, Sunken Gardens by Karen Randall. And she tells you need 100 par in your tanks to really grow plants well. I specifically asked her about using under cabinet lighting on my 5.5 gallon. She told me, no, it'll grow nothing. And yet I grew plants with it. And so, there's definitely, and I'm not saying Karen doesn't know what she's talking about. She definitely does. She knows much more about plants than I do. She understands a lot more things, but she's also doing something that's very different than what I'm doing. I'm having some plants in my tank that are easy plants to grow, that are something just for me to enjoy, and she is growing much more difficult plants. And so in her mind, yeah, you have to have at least, because that opens the door up to so many more plants that she wants to keep. But the reality is, yeah, I mean, you can do a lot with a much smaller amount of light than you expect and a much cheaper light than you expect. I've been tempted to change out my shop light and get a real aquarium light, some point. And I look at my tank, and I'm like, well, why would I? I mean, yes, a shop light's not exactly the prettiest looking thing on top of your fish tank. I think that's about the only thing I'll say about it is, my fish tank has this white shop light just sitting on it. It doesn't look great. But other than that, there's no downside to it. And I think at that 5,000 Kelvin mark, it really does look good. So, yeah, I'm right there with you, Travis, as far as that lighting goes. And I didn't expect to be there. Like when I first started using shop lights and under cabinet lights, I didn't expect them to be as good as they are. But the reality is you're getting some great plant growth out of those lights as long as everything else is in balance.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one of the things that I think most people overlook it because it's not made for aquariums, and I think that's what people get into the mindset of is like, oh, I have to buy an aquarium light, right? It has to be a fluval light or a Phoenix light because that's what online is telling me, right? And when you could go out the next time you go to the grocery store and get food, you could buy an aquarium light for, well, put it this way, what'd you spend on your shop light?
Oh, I think I spent $30 on it.
Yeah,
I think that's what it was. It was a couple of years ago now, but I mean, it was not much. That's for sure.
All my shop lights, I think they were like 15, and the under cabinet lights, each one that's on this here was $9.
Yeah,
and if I went out and bought a Nycrew or let's just say like a Phoenix Stingray, I think a Phoenix Stingray for a 10-gallon tank is like 35 or 40 at least.
Yeah, and it's funny
and they're not. Yeah, and they're considered more of like a Chinese light because they're not Louisville or whatever,
Yeah, I should mention with my 5,000 watt light there that I use, that shop light, I actually had to add CO2 to it because it was too much light. So really, I could have done, and I know that's one of the reasons yours are cheaper than mine. I think yours are all like that 3,600 watt light.
Yeah, I think they're like 3,500 lumen or
35, whatever. Yeah, right around that range. And so you don't even have to buy the expensive one when you run to Walmart. You can buy the cheaper one and still be able to grow plants with it.
Yeah, definitely. And that's like you just mentioned CO2. You don't have to get CO2. 90% of the aquarium plants that you can go out and just buy at your local fish store or your local chain store, you don't need CO2 for those. Those will grow in just a natural aquarium environment. And if you're worried about the amount of CO2, I talk about this all the time, and Tim laughs at me because I remember all this. But if you want to get CO2 in your aquarium, you can just run an air stone. And I know a lot of people say, oh, but you're creating surface agitation and it's gassing off all that CO2. Sure, but it's also reintroducing CO2. There is CO2 that's naturally available in the air that we breathe. And by putting that air stone into your aquarium, you're reintroducing CO2 into the aquarium. Granted, it's not going to be anywhere near the level that you're going to have with CO2 injection. I think CO2 injection puts you at about a 40% saturation, where an air stone will put you about 8%. So definitely you're getting some in there, but it's not going to be anywhere near what you can get with injection, but it's more than enough than what you need to grow plants naturally, right, in a low-tech aquarium. So unless you want to invest in CO2, you probably don't need to. All right, so I think that covers that.
Well, I'm just going to mention this too. If you guys are thinking about liquid CO2, don't bother. It's not real CO2. Liquid CO2, first off, you can't bottle liquid CO2. That doesn't work. You have to have it in pressurized containers. And so that is not CO2. It does increase your carbon, but it's actually going to increase your carbon level in your water even less than an air stone does. So don't even bother with the liquid CO2 if you're thinking that's going to help, increase your
liquid CO2 and CO2 boosters that you can buy off the shelf in a plastic bottle in a store. Most of the time, that's a product called glutaraldehyde, which is actually a biocide that they use in hospitals to sterilize patient rooms and cleaning their tools, and basically environment sterilization is what glutaraldehyde is used for. But in the aquarium industry, they use it as an algicide, right? So essentially how they are able to market it as a CO2 booster is they're able to get a very diluted solution into a bottle, and then you dose that in your aquarium. And what it's going to do is it's going to attack the simple-celled plants, mostly algae. But you got to be careful because some mosses and like jungle val, they're not big fans of it either. It could kill those. But you're basically killing off the algae, and because you're killing off the algae, which is a plant life, the CO2 that would have been going to the algae is now going to be able to be used for your plants. So that's how you're boosting the CO2, by killing off the algae. Now, it does have some liquid carbon, is what they're calling it. And I believe chemically it's available for less than 24 hours, and it only gives you like 0.2 grams per hour, because it's like a slow release, which I did the math on this. I have a video on it if you guys want to check out my channel. But I believe just running an air stone gives like 3 or 4 times more CO2 than liquid CO2 booster does. So it's just like, if you have an algae issue, sure, you can use that. But if you don't have an algae issue, just run an air stone. So after that, filtration. So filtration's a big one. Because
I'm gonna jump in on this one, Travis, because this is one of those things that like really bothers me as far as how filtration's handled, right? So when you're talking about filtration, basically you're talking about 3 types of filtration. You're talking about a chemical filtration, you're talking about a biological filtration, you're talking about mechanical filtration. So when you're talking about chemical filtration, that's going to remove chemicals out of the water. It also removes some of the nutrients. So like if you have a planted tank, don't run carbon filtration unless you're removing medicines, because you're actually going to start taking away from your plants, right? But so those are the 3 you're talking about. And one of the things I hate about the fact is that we always separate the mechanical and the biological, right? So when you're talking about biological, there's things like you can go get bio rings and things of that nature. And yes, that will build bacteria on it, but so will everything that has the mechanical filtration. Mechanical filtration, we think of sponges. Well, any space that bacteria can grow is going to end up growing that biological filtration too. And so, for me, one of the things I hate about the aquarium hobby is when you look at, first off, there's so many things out there that, oh, you have this type of filter, you can add all these different types of filtration to it. And the reality is you probably don't need that. The other thing is we are way over filtering our aquariums. So Travis bought an FX6, I don't know, like 3-4 years ago, something like that. He did a review on it, and then he did nothing with it. Well, why did he do nothing with it? Because the biggest tank he was running at the time, I think it was like a 150, right?
Yep.
And an FX6 is way more than a 150 needs. And
Yeah, I
so
think it's rated at 400 gallons.
yeah. So, that's one of those, he finally put that on his 300-gallon goldfish tank. And you could debate whether he even needs it on there or not, but that's where you're starting. But everybody, oh, how many FX6 should I get for my 75-gallon? The answer is zero. Don't, because it's not going to help your fish tank. The one, you're going to put way too much water movement into your aquarium for your plants, for your fish. Most of the plants and fish that we have in our aquarium hobby don't want that kind of flow rate. There are exceptions, but they are exceptions, not your everyday fish. So we overfiltrate. We use things that we don't need. I have a whole thing of carbon that I can use in my aquariums that I think I've used maybe like twice to pull out medications. And I don't need it. And every time I go and get a used fish tank, somebody's handing me more carbon that I don't need because it's just not something we use in the aquarium hobby. And then when you look at those hang-on backs, and this is where when we're talking about saving money and the aquarium industry and how ridiculous it is, right? So biofiltration is one of those pieces that it's going to help process your ammonia, turn that, it's going to build up bacteria in there. It's going to process that ammonia and get nitrate at the end of that process. And then it's going to hold bacteria that's going to take that nitrite and turn it into nitrate. And hopefully I said that right. But the process there is that bacteria is built up in that filter. Well, with those hang-on back filters, a lot of the companies give you like these, oh, here's your hang-on back filter cartridge. And you stick this in and you run it for 2 weeks and then you pull it out and replace it with a new one. Well, why did you replace it? You just took all of your biological filtration right out of your tank. And that's not a good way to do it at all. So that's my little rant because I do get really bothered by that. And I know I kind of hit a bunch of different things all at one time. But Travis, if you have other things you want to add, go ahead and jump in there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And the one thing that I see all the time posted on like the Facebook groups, and I kind of have to like step back from these groups all the time just because like you get aggravated, you know. And one thing I see there was one post that I saw, it was 2 weeks ago, and that's kind of like what got the whole idea for this video going, was somebody went out, they had a 75-gallon aquarium, and they put 2 FX6 canister filters on there because they were told that overfiltration is key. They had a peacock cichlid tank, right? So they had all their OBs and cichlids, and they had all this flow. They had an output on each corner coming out to the front, meeting in the middle, and it was churning the water up. And he was wondering why his fish weren't swimming around. They were all huddling down by the bottom. They were getting sick. They seemed stressed. And realistically, if you think about it, right? So you've got a 75-gallon aquarium, and then after you remove all the space for the rocks, the substrate and everything, you've probably got about 50 gallons of water. So each FX6 canister filter has a flow rate of about 950 gallons an hour. So you've got double that. So you've got 1,900 gallons an hour flow rate on 50 gallons of water. You've got like 20 times your rate, right? So generally, the absolute most you want to do is like 10 times. And even that's a lot, right? You're going to stress fish out once you get up around the 10 times mark. So you want to keep your flow rate up. That way it pushes all of the solids and waste off the bottom so your filter can collect it. That's essentially what they're talking about when you want to have good enough flow so that your mechanical filtration can actually pick it up and hold it and remove it from the viewing part of the aquarium. But if you're getting to the point where your fish are getting exhausted and too tired to actually move around, that's a problem too. So that's one of the things I don't understand and why they're pushing these larger filters, right? So like, for example, right, like you said, the FX6 that I bought it and didn't use it for like 3 years because I didn't have my 300-gallon aquarium set up yet because I was rebuilding it. But I wouldn't use it on anything else because it's complete overkill, right? So even on my 125-gallon aquarium, if I put a filter on that, I would probably just put a hang-on back like a AquaClear 110. That's got a 500-gallon an hour flow rate. That would be 5 times that aquarium volume every hour. So I don't want to put an FX6 on there where it's going to be pushing 10 times and blowing my fish all to one side of the aquarium. It's not needed. And for the amount of money they have people spending on these canister filters that put out this huge volume, I think if you don't get one on sale, I think they're $279, so like $300. Where you could go and buy, let's just say, like a Marineland 350, like a Penguin 350. I think the flow rate on those is 425, and I think they're $25. So you can go out and buy 3 of them, put them across your 125, and then you've got 1,200 gallons flow rate. So you've got more flow rate, you've got more mechanical filtration capability off of $75 filters, combined for the 3 of them than you would off of a $300 canister filter. So that's the one thing that one of the biggest things, in my opinion, about overcomplicating the aquarium hobby is they're pushing these large filters as a way to make money. And it's not necessarily as a way to turn around and actually get back from your investment. You're essentially just losing. The FX6 canister filters are a giant sponge filter. The whole thing is just full of sponge. It's a giant sponge filter with a power head on it, is essentially what it is. And it's really nothing different. It's just an external sponge filter. And it I see people upgrading all the time from hang on backs, like, oh, I got this big canister filter. It's like, okay, you've moved your filtration from in the tank to outside the tank. Congratulations. You spent a lot of money for no reason. And some people just like canister filters. There's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you want to do, that's what you do. And that's the reason I run sponge filters. They cost $5, and you get the same results you would out of a hang-on back or a canister or whatever. It's your source of biological media and mechanical media to filter your aquarium, because 99% of the time you don't need the chemical filtration. But yeah, that's kind of my rant on that, because like, it doesn't make any sense to me why they're pushing all of this high money stuff unless you look at it from the viewpoint of the company that's pushing it, because they're coming out with new products and making them more money. So if you already have a filter and it's working well for you, don't change it. If you want to change something, you can get rid of your cartridges, and you put like most of my videos, even this one after it uploads is going to have in the description. Actually, it might be there now too. You can scroll down to the filtration, like sponge filters, and there's a sponge pad. You can get that pad, cut a chunk out, stick it in there, and that'll actually almost double your biological volume. So then your current filter is going to be more capable than it was before for minimal cost input. And that's one of the things that really, it bothers me, which you guys could probably tell because I got kind of ranty there, about the aquarium industry, is they're selling you a lot of products that don't necessarily need to be sold, because what we have already works. And there's no reason for somebody to be buying a canister filter rated for a 400-gallon aquarium and putting it on a 55-gallon aquarium or a 75-gallon aquarium. Like, there's no need for that. And it's all because of the stigma of you can't overfiltrate an aquarium, which it's true. You can't overfiltrate it, but you can create way too much flow. And that's actually going to be worse for your fish than having a lower amount of flow with just regular filtration.
Yeah, and I think even with that, when you're talking about the mechanical filtration aspect of that too, like, oh yeah, more mechanical filtration, clearer water, except not always. Sometimes you have more water flow and it kicks it up again, and now you actually have water that looks worse because you added more filtration. So yeah, I think there's a number of things there that obviously we could spend a lot of time talking about filtration, but I would say the only other thing though I would mention is, as far as use what you got, absolutely. But when you go to replace it, think about how much money you're spending. I use nothing but sponge filters, and I have one AquaClear 110 that I debate pulling down every time I have to clean it. But a sponge filter and an air pump, especially if you're already running an air pump, is a whole lot cheaper than replacing a hang-on back filter. And now, if you don't like the way because if it comes down to looks for you, I get that. I'm all about that. But if you're like, I don't like seeing a sponge filter in my tank, sure, go ahead, run something different. You don't like
Yep.
seeing a hang on back, sure, go ahead, go get that canister filter. To me, that's a good reason to get it, is because you just don't like the way it looks. But if you're worried about filtration, don't bother.
Yeah. If the only worry you have is the amount of filtration you have, it doesn't matter. Any filter can be changed. Not any. For the most part, any filter can be modified or changed to get to a point that it will work for you. Like my 125, I had one Penguin 350 on there, and I had 12 fancy goldfish in it at one point, and I just upgraded to the sponge pads. And I went from having cloudy water every once in a while to never having cloudy water again, because I was never losing enough of the bacterial colonies that I had just by upgrading that much. Going from a cartridge to a sponge was more than enough just to make the aquarium happy, create that equilibrium. So things can be done. You can do a little bit of modification to it, and it will probably save you a lot more money and work just as well in the long run. All right. So this will probably be a pretty quick one. Heaters. Aquarium heaters. Now, this is something I say all the time about aquarium heaters. If you're wondering which aquarium heater is the best one you can go out and buy, the answer is none of them. They all suck, right? They're all terrible. They're all awful. And the reason I say that is because your aquarium heater is going to fail. It's not a matter of like how long it's going to live. It's that it will fail, and you're going to have to replace it. Every aquarium heater has a certain amount of heat cycles that it's going to be able to run before one of the electronic components inside, whether it be the thermostat that's inside of your heater, fails, or one of the electric coils in there that actually heat your water fails. But they only have a certain amount of cycles. Now, they're not going to tell you how many cycles that is based on their testing, because they just want to sell you a product. So I've done a lot of research into different ones that I've been running. I've run a lot of Aqueon. I've run a lot of Eheim Jaegers. I've run a lot of Fluval heaters. I've run numerous discount Amazon heaters. And honestly, the best heater I've found, price-wise and performance-wise, is actually going to be those Amazon heaters, the CNZ aquarium heaters. You can buy two 300-watt aquarium heaters. I think it was for $23. And so far, I've had some of those heaters running almost 2 years. And they're still running great. And I've gone through numerous Aqueon heaters. I've gone through some Fluval heaters. I've gone through some Eheim Jaeger heaters. And these CNZ heaters are still going. It's absolutely baffling to me. And part of it is just me thinking that it's just because they're trying to make more money. They're trying to sell you a product, say it's a good product, but cut back on the quality a little bit just so that they have the overturn and able to make more money on it. So that's just my thought. So generally what I say when it comes to heaters is, if you're going to buy a heater, buy one that you can afford to replace once a year. Not saying you're going to have to replace it once a year, but make it so that you can afford to replace it on a dime. Because if your aquarium heater dies, it's not like, oh, well, I can wait till payday, right? Like, have an extra one laying around, or at least have enough money set aside that you'd be able to buy one in a pinch if you had to. And that's what I like about the CNZs, is they come as a 2-pack. So if you buy them, you already have a spare, right? So it just works out great. So that's my 2 cents on heaters. I don't like them. I don't like them at all. You have any input on that?
Yeah, the heaters are bad. Like that, I agree with you completely. I would say the only other thing, when you're thinking about heaters, make sure you actually need one. If you have a goldfish tank, you probably don't need a heater, because your house is going to stay warm enough year round that it's not going to need a heater. And there's other fish like that as well. Now, the majority of the fish, I think, that are popular in the hobby, you need at least a heater, or you need to keep your house warm enough that they're going to be comfortable. But most fish can live at 70 degrees. Now there are exceptions. Like if you have rams, they're not going to do well at 70 degrees. You have discus, they're not going to do well at 70 degrees. You're going to end up losing them. But a lot of fish out there, absolutely. And if your house is 70, there's a good chance your fish tank is 72 because you are running, things like filtration through that. You have the lights on it. And so, yeah, I would say make sure you actually need a heater. Now, I need a heater in my house because I keep it at 55 in the winter. So I don't have any fish that want to be that cold. So I run heaters in all of my aquariums. But for a lot of people, that may not be the case. You may not need them.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree. And actually, I have a little story for that. And you know this because I told you about it. It was last winter, I bought some Ember Tetras. Now, if you go online and look up Ember Tetras, you're probably going to see that they want to be in a range of about 75 to 82 degrees. They're a tropical fish. And I bought them off of a website, which I'm not going to name currently. And they were shipped to me from California. I believe that's where they're from, right? California. They're out west. Maybe it's Oregon, Washington. Yeah, somewhere out there. And they shipped them all the way across the country to Pennsylvania, probably almost 1,700 miles, in February. And they got lost in shipping, and they didn't show up for 2 weeks. And I thought, I'm just going to end up calling this company. I'm going to have to file a DOA, and they're going to have to reship them when the weather's warmer. Because the heat pack they had in there was only for 3 days. So when the shipment came in, I opened them up expecting to see, 20 dead Ember Tetras. And they were all alive, every single one of them. And it was like 20 degrees out at night, So fish are a lot more versatile and a lot more adaptable than we generally think they are. So, yeah. I would totally agree with you that a lot of fish probably don't require the water to be much below, they could survive in 70 to 75. And that's that whole thing we were talking about where the aquarium industry is claiming that the ideal range, right? And that you see that everywhere across the aquarium industry, like the ideal is like one of the keywords that they use a lot. And that's just because that is what that is. It's the ideal range. It doesn't mean you can't work outside of that. So the last one that I wanted to talk about is medications. And medications, this is a tough one because there's a lot of different places across the world that our viewers come in from, right? A lot of mine are overseas, so they don't have access to all this stuff. So generally when people ask me what are the medications that I have on hand, and I keep erythromycin, general cure, ICX, and aquarium salt. And generally speaking, that's all I use. And people ask me all the time, like, well, what if I can't get that stuff? Well, I always tell them, well, you can get salt. I know you can get salt. You can get that anywhere. Like, you eat with it, So aquarium salt, if you can't afford to buy erythromycin or general cure or ICX, aquarium salt is going to solve 95% of aquarium related illnesses. Whether you have a bacterial infection, whether you have a fungal infection, if you have external parasites, aquarium salt at the right dosage will treat 95% of that and completely remedy it. That, and along with frequent water changes. Clean water and salt will fix almost anything without any kind of additional medication added to it. And that's just something to live by. If you can't find medications, you can probably find salt. If you're in a pinch and your fish got an injury, you could probably run out to your local grocery store and get salt while you wait on medication if you want to add medication. And you'd be able to actually start treatment right away. Now, you don't want to use iodized salt. You want to use like kosher salt or pickling salt, which is just pure NaCl, pure salt. The same thing as aquarium salt. You can use that and you can treat almost anything. I know you kind of feel the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was saying, I actually did a live stream last week with Michael from Michael's Fish Room, and I was talking to him a little bit about it. And I have to be careful here because I don't get a lot of sick fish, because I'm a local, like, I'm a hobbyist. I'm a breeder. I'm not somebody who's selling fish a lot. I'm not somebody who has a lot of new fish coming into my fish room constantly. Or if I do, it's from other local breeders where they're pretty healthy to begin with. So I don't deal with a lot of sicknesses to begin with. That being said, yeah, I think the biggest thing for me, if you want a healthy fish, keep healthy water. And so, yeah, do those water changes, and you're not going to get sick fish to begin with. I've had hundreds of fish in small aquariums where you'd be like, oh, that's way, way overstocked. And the answer is, it's only way overstocked if you're not doing your water changes. If everything's staying healthy and everything's staying, your parameters are staying within a normal range, then it's not overstocked. But those water changes are extremely vital to keeping that fish healthy. And then, yeah, if they get sick, really most of my experience with sick fish, I haven't been able to bring back with medicines. I've had better luck with salt. And I don't know if that's partly because I'm struggling to identify what some of those sicknesses are, just because, again, I don't deal with that many sick fish. And so sometimes it's hard for me to know for sure, like, okay, what is that? But yeah, I mean, other than that, so I don't want to add a whole lot to what you said because I agree with you, but I don't have a lot of experience dealing with sick fish either.
Right. That's understandable. And a lot of people, as long as you have good local fish stores or you do know enough breeders or hobbyists that do breed fish, you're better off getting fish from them as long as you know they're healthy and stuff like that. And for the most part, people aren't going to be bringing in a ton of fish unless they're having a ton of loss, right? So for the most part, like I don't think I've gone to a local fish store in probably like 3 months because most of my tanks are stocked and my fish are all alive. But yeah, I agree. So I think what we're going to do now is we're going to go back through because we've been going for an hour already. Time flies when you're having fun, huh?
Yeah, and just if you hear some noise in the background, my son's going to play some video games, and I don't have a dedicated area that is away from him. So hopefully, I don't think a lot of it will pick up, but if you guys do hear it, you can just say hi to Ian. That's all that is.
Yeah. All right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go back through the comments section. You guys have been posting quite a bit here, and we'll go through, we'll answer some questions, and talk about some stuff that you guys want to talk about. So, and I think that this application has a pretty neat feature that you can actually bring them up on screen.
Yeah, but you're going to have to pull up because I can't look at them and look at my camera. So,
yeah, there we go. So I'll bring them up on screen, and then we can talk about them. So this was one of the first ones. Can we talk about basic plants for beginners? Something a lot of new fish keepers can find challenging. So I think we did cover that a little bit. A lot of your basic plants like Amazon swords, Anacris, Anubias, most cryptocorns, floating plants. Like if you want a plant that you can't kill, right, and you suck at growing plants, duckweed. You're going to grow it. You get one in your aquarium, and in a week, it looks like this. Yeah. So you're going to grow duckweed. But there's a ton of easy plants. I think you have some videos on easy aquarium plants for beginners, Tim.
Yeah, I have. And Nubius is definitely, to me, that's the number one easiest plant. And I talked about that earlier. But yeah, you can check out if you go on my channel, I have a whole list of different plants that I talk about. And I think all of them are really pretty easy plants to grow. And I talk about some of what they need and that type of thing. So yeah, and I'm probably going to be adding to that list this next weekend. I got another plant video that I'm planning on putting out this weekend. So, as far as, Amazon swords, definitely different sword plants. But the thing is with new keepers, I think one of the things that you struggle with the most as a new fish keeper is not leaving your plants alone. And so because so many of them die back, a lot of people think like, oh no, this plant's dead. And no, it's not. It's just converting. But you pull it out because you think it's dead. And if you just left it alone, it would have come back and it would have looked good and you would have been okay. So, you mentioned most of the ones that I would recommend. I mean, there are anything that's going to grow up to the top of the water is going to be easier too, because it's going to get more. Going back to that CO2, all plants need CO2, and the more they can get, the quicker they can grow. So anything that's floating up top, that's easy. If you want a little bit of color, I'm struggling here because my brain's not working today, but the aquarium lilies, you get some red color in there and they'll sprout up leaves all the way to the top. And, that's a plant that, man, if you looked at my aquarium lily right now, it looks like it's dying, but those go through a cycle. So you will see those die and then they'll come back again. So
yeah, they're definitely a seasonal plant.
yeah. So my biggest suggestion with basic plants for beginners is some of those we mentioned, and then leave them alone, and give them a little more time than you think they need.
Yeah, definitely. So this next one here, this is a two-parter. My plants are struggling a bit, but I'm scared to add liquid ferts in case I get a lot of algae. Have some aqua soil and root tabs under gravel, but plants are not thriving. So I'm wondering if it's two separate questions, but I'm wondering if it's the same tank he's having an issue with here. But for this one here, my question back to you would be, what kind of plants are they? Because it sounds like you have a lot of nutrition in the soil, where you've got your root tabs and your aqua soil, but you might not have enough in the water column. So if the plants are going to be more water column feeding, they might be struggling to get the nutrition that they actually need out of the water. That would just be my thought on that. If you're still around, go ahead and drop a comment and we can get back to that. That's kind of my thought.
Yeah, the other thing with when anytime you're dealing with plants, it's always a balance issue. So I mentioned I have CO2 in my one tank, and the reason I have CO2 in that one tank is because I had too much lighting. So if you have too much light or too much nutrients, you're going to get more algae, and basically your plants aren't going to grow as well because you're dealing with algae. So really, if your plants aren't growing well enough, what I do is I'd start with one, and adjust to one. So maybe you have all the nutrients you need, and but let me rephrase, maybe you'd have all the nutrients you need if you weren't adding so much light to your tank. So maybe you have to cut back your light to 8 hours. Maybe it's the other way. Maybe I've got plenty of nutrients, but I'm not giving it enough light. You have to increase that light. So I typically like to start with one of those three and adjust one of them accordingly. So, if I've got 0 nitrates in my water, well then, yeah, I'd start with the fertilizer. But if you have, when you're getting to that point where you're going to change water and you've got 50 nitrates in your water, it's probably not a nutrient issue. It's probably, a light issue or something. So it's trying to find that balance is always going to be key.
Yeah, definitely. And then this was his second question, which kind of had me wondering if it was like intertwined. Has 2 tanks, 55-gallon and a 5-gallon. Both are planted. He uses test strips, which nothing really wrong with that. They're going to get you close. Water in both are testing good, but CO2 is off the scale. No CO2 added, but always been off the scale. So a lot of times, if you live in the city, some of the water treatment plants will actually add CO2 as a way to combat bacteria in the water. Most add like chlorine and chloramine, but some actually add CO2 as well. So I would test that. I would get a glass of water and test your tap water right out of the tap and see if it gases off over time, or if over time it doesn't change at all. If it doesn't change at all, the way you are testing your water might be not effective. I'm curious to see how you're testing for CO2, if you're using a drop checker or if you have some other kind of testing method. But if this links back to your other question, and for whatever reason you do have excess CO2 in the aquarium somehow, you could have a lack of nutrition in your water column, and your plants could just be trying to use up all of that nutrient, and it's actually starving out. So that could be the issue there. But let us know. If you're still around, drop another comment and let us know. That's kind of a weird problem to have, excess CO2.
Yeah, I'm curious too as to how he's testing that. Typically if you have excess CO2, you could add more air stones and it would take care of that.
Just create more surface agitation to gas it off a little faster.
Yeah. I mean, typically when we think, in all honesty, plants don't typically think of too much CO2. Typically, when we talk about too much CO2, it's for your fish. So, yeah, are your fish dying? Because that would be the only thing that would indicate to me that there's too much CO2. So, I don't know.
Yeah. Let's see. Best way to get food to corridors in a tank full of mollies and platies. So cories are going to want to feed on the bottom. Mollies and platies are going to want to feed on top. So you're going to want to feed two separate foods, one on the bottom, one on top, and try to feed the mollies and platies first, right? You're going to want to get them to eat, get their bellies full so they're not as aggressive with the food that you're putting in, and then try and feed the cories after or towards the end of your feeding. And you're going to want to feed something that's fairly heavy. So either pellet food for them, or if you want to use like a block of Repashy food that you can just reach down in there and place it down the bottom somewhere that they can get to it, but the mollies and platies won't really see it, and let them feed that way. That would probably work out fairly well. What do you think?
Yeah, mollies and platies, they're for the most part, you're right, they're going to feed up top. They will feed throughout the tank, so they will get down there at the bottom too. And they're pigs. So, yeah, I agree. Your best way, at least how I would do it, is something up top and something below, and hope that the mollies and platies stay up top.
Yeah, and it seems like he's kind of doing that already because he's Hikari sinking wafers after they've eaten all of their flakes. And yeah, like you said, they're just pigs, right? Yeah. So you're probably going to have to try and find a spot where you can reach in and place the food, because it's going to be one of those things where it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind for them. If they can see it, they're probably going to want to try and eat it right away. But if it's kind of hidden and the cories can get to it, you might have a little bit more success with that.
Yeah, the only other option is overfeed and do more water changes.
Yeah, pretty much. Let's see. I have sand substrate, planted plenty of Anubias species that are thriving. Aquarium is 14 months established. I planted Bacopa Carolina a month ago, and it's not doing real good. Any idea why? Well, it's only been in there a month. It might just be trying to get used to your water structure and your aquarium. Sometimes these plants have a little bit of a rough adjusting period, but eventually they turn around and come back. I think I actually had some Bacopa Carolina in my 65-gallon out here, and it took about 2 months for it to actually like turn around and start coming back from the initial die-off.
Yeah, I find with the Bacopa Carolina that even when I trim it, I'll trim it down quite a bit, and then it will not grow again for me for months, and then all of a sudden it'll sprout up like crazy again. So yeah, I think it's one that it doesn't like being moved a whole lot, and I'd say give it a little more time and see what happens. The other thing is, the Nubius doesn't need a lot of nutrients at all. Like if you just had Nubius, you probably wouldn't need any nutrients really in your water, and they'd probably be okay. With Bacopa needs a little bit more because it's a stem plant. It wants to grow a little faster, so it uses a little bit more of the nutrients. So you could take a look at that as well.
Yeah, Bacopa's more of it's a shower, not a grower. So let's see. Span Dog, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it, man. Yeah, that's one thing we should probably touch on is if you're going to be growing any plants like Anubias or Java Fern that have a rhizome, you don't want to bury that rhizome under the substrate. As soon as you do, that plant is going to start dying off very quickly. So definitely want to attach it to rocks or driftwood or something like that, and it's going to definitely do way better for you.
Yeah, I was just looking to see if I had a picture of what a rhizome is, and I've got my book right here, my Sunken Gardens book right here, and so I was checking, and I don't see. Um, I turned right to the Nubius page. It doesn't look like I have anything that shows a rhizome, but what you're talking about with the rhizome, for anybody who doesn't know, the Nubius and same thing with like Java fern and any type of epiphyte plant like that, they're going to have this rhizome that basically looks like this. You're going to have leaves that are growing up off of it like that, and then roots that come down like this. You don't want to bury that green stem that travels this way. And hopefully that makes sense for everybody. But yeah.
So this is Dustin over on the Aquatic Guru YouTube page. He's personally a fan of tissue culture plants, whether they're terrarium, semi-aquatic, or aquatic. And yeah, tissue culture is really good. If you can find it in your area and you can grow your plants up from tissue culture, they're going to be snail-free, and you're basically going to be starting off from little tiny pieces of aquarium plant, growing yourself into plants that are almost 100% dedicated to your water quality and your water structure. So they're going to grow pretty much really well once they get established. And that's a good way to actually get propagating plants, because if these plants are going to be that used to your water and that healthy and happy in your water, they're likely going to propagate for you as well. So you can move those new plants over to new aquariums or turn around and sell them, whatever you want to do. But tissue culture is a pretty good way to start if you know how to do it. It's not really hard to do. You can go on YouTube and look it up.
Yeah, the other nice thing about tissue cultures is usually you get a lot more plants. So a lot of people look at the, going back to like a PetSmart, right? You see these big plants in these tubes. It's like, oh, look, I can get a big plant. And then you go look at the tissue cultures and there are these little tiny plants. But the reality is you might get like 20 of those tissue culture plants versus one of the other plants that are in those tubes. And so, yeah, that's the other nice thing about the tissue cultures is you usually get a lot of them. They're very small. So you have to be a little patient that they're going to grow in. But yeah.
Yep. And that's one of those ones that's good to have like a 2.5 gallon or a 5.5 gallon tank set up specifically just to grow your plants out. And I know that's what he did, and that's a great method for doing that. So here's something interesting. Adding botanicals such as leaf litter and just letting it rot naturally creates fertilizer. And that's one of the things like I was talking about with the organic potting soil that you use. That's basically what it is. It's just rotted leaves and sticks and grass all turned back into dirt. And it's essentially the same thing. This one just happens in the aquarium while it's running instead of before you set it up. So yeah, basically the same thing.
Yeah, there's other benefits to that too. I mean, some of those botanicals are a food source. If you have shrimp, like if you have Indian almond leaves, they end up being a food source for your actual shrimp in there. And they also actually have some health benefits to them. It's like a real mild antibacterial.
Yeah, from the tannins that they release.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep, I agree. Some people don't necessarily like the color that the LED shop lights put out. But the one thing that I would recommend if you guys are looking at shop lights, make sure you check the color spectrum. I know there's a lot of LED shop lights out that run 3,400 Kelvin, which is that warm white light that I was telling you about. Well, not white, it's more like a yellowish orange light. Make sure you get one that's in the 5,000 range. They're pretty common nowadays, not so much as they were in the past. But even still, it's natural white light. I know a lot of fishes, if you have a lot of fish that are more blue, purple, if you're getting more into like your cichlids and peacocks, you're probably going to want to run a light closer to 8 to 10,000 Kelvin, somewhere in that range. That's a little bit more blue. It's going to really bring out the blues and purples and really make that color pop on those fish. So I imagine that's probably what this comment here is more in reference to. If you have fish that are more orange, yellow, white, colors like that, like brighter, softer colors, 5,000 Kelvin is probably going to work perfectly fine and look great for you.
Yeah, my Bosemani Rainbow look fantastic with that 5,000 Kelvin light. The color really pops on those. So
Let's see. Yep, par. And that's one of the things that's kind of hard because there aren't many lights that actually list what their par rating is at depths. So, for those that don't know, par is photosynthetic available radiation or active radiation. And that is the amount of light that is put out by the light that is available for the plants to use to photosynthesize. So for those of you that have no idea what I just said, that's how much light the light puts out. So if, and it's hard to test the light too, because the par readings that the testers that you would have to get are quite expensive. So if you want an LED par meter, they're like $500, and most people aren't going to go out and buy they're not going to go buy one just to test one light, right? And I don't know of anybody on the line. I know Corey from Aquarium Co-op has done some work with a bunch of different lighting, but he hasn't really done it much anymore. But there aren't that many people that actually have gone out and done par readings on all these different lights. And the other thing that you have to know about par on aquarium lights is every 4 inches it's cut in half. So if you have a light, for example, this light back here, if right here you're looking at 60 par, right? You go down 4 inches, now you're at 30 par. And you go down 4 more inches, now you're at 15 par, and so on and so forth. So that's when people are talking about par, that's what you're looking at, is that number of how much photosynthetic radiation is available for those plants at that depth. So like that book you were talking about where she says you want 100 par, is she talking you want 100 par here or here? Because that makes a big difference, right? And I think I'm trying to remember here, indirect sunlight is like 1200 par, right? So if you're looking at light, like if you're sitting in a room and the sun is just coming in through the window but not shining through the window, if you know what I mean there, and the difference, that's 1200 par. Like a naturally lit room is 1200 par. So that's why a lot of house plants do really well without getting direct sunlight. Par is just one of those weird things that it's just like you think you need a ton of it and you really don't. And a lot of the lights that we have nowadays really don't put out a ton of it either. I think I saw somebody doing a test on the Fluval 3.0, and I think it was at the bottom of like a 29-gallon aquarium. It was only putting out like 30 par, which like really isn't that much, right? So, and that just leads back into you don't need as much par as you think you do in order to grow plants. Um, 8 hours of light, that's a good starting point. 8 hours is pretty good. Usually I run anywhere from 6 to 10, depending on the light, how deep the tank is, how many plants you have. There's factors, but usually a little bit of testing, you can dial it in.
Yeah, that I don't have much to add to that, but yeah, same thing.
Yeah.
6 to 10.
2 4-hour slots. Yeah. So what you're doing is you're doing what's called a siesta period, which is you are resting your plants, which is going to do 2 things. You're allowing the CO2 to build up in the aquarium after your lights turn off. So aquarium plants, when the lights are on, use CO2 and produce oxygen. And when the lights are off, the plants are actually going to consume oxygen and produce CO2. So by creating a siesta period and allowing that CO2 to build back up a little bit, when you turn your lights back on, it's going to allow your plants to reuse that CO2. And some people say it does aid in growth a little bit. It helps the plants grow a little more. But basically what you're doing is you're almost doubling the amount of usable CO2 in the aquarium for the amount of time that you have the lights on. Some people say it works, some people say it doesn't. But if that's what you want to do, that's perfectly fine.
I think most people do it just so they can enjoy the lights on when they're home.
That too, yeah, because if you're going to run your lights on your normal daytime cycle, like you're never going to see it if you go out and work all day. Yep. Keep it simple, stupid. Yeah, and that's pretty much like what the whole video is about. Like, you don't have to go out and buy the most expensive stuff and get the most high tech equipment and top of the line gear and all that stuff. If you have water in a glass box with some kind of biological filtration, you don't even need a light really. You can keep fish. Like, keep it simple. You know, it's just one of those things that they've turned a very simple thing into something that's completely overcomplicated for most of the people that try to do it.
Yeah, I actually did a live stream this week, and I was talking about just keeping plants and what do plants need. And I think so often in the fish hobby we forget that plants in the aquarium need the exact same thing that plants outside do. You know, like my 10-year-old son is in 4th grade, and you ask him what do plants need, he knows they need light, they need water, and they need carbon dioxide and nutrients. Like that's that's pretty basic. And we get to the fish hobby, and it's like, oh, let's add all these other little pieces here and there. Not obviously, as part of that's because we control the entire environment there. But yeah, like we don't need to make it complex.
Yeah. Um, you may have something with less is more. I've only been in the fish hobby now for about 5 years, and I've had 2 tank crashes. One was due to RO water. Didn't know that I shouldn't use it. Well, you can use RO water. It depends on what you're trying to use it for. So if you're trying to keep like discus, they want pretty low mineral content in their water. So RO water is usually pretty good. But if you're keeping fish that really want those minerals, like I see in your next comment here, trying to raise 1,000 guppies in a 55 with no water changes, pushing the plants to do all the work a bit too far. If you're trying to keep guppies and you're trying to use RO water, you have to try to remineralize that water, because a lot of fish are going to be quite reliant on the mineral content in the water. And if you're removing it all, they don't have it available, which creates weak immune systems, which results in crashed aquariums. So yeah, and 1,000 guppies in a 55, Tim, that's like your realm of stuff over there. You got
Yeah,
crazy amount of guppies in small tanks.
yeah, absolutely. Well, and I would say it's not even so much like, yeah, you're not only are you probably going to run into issues as far as your plants not being able to consume all those nitrates and make your fish sick, but they're also going to be using those minerals in the water, and your guppies like that, so they like having those minerals in the water. But if your plants are consuming all of them, that's going to be another issue you run into too. So yeah, like doing tanks with fish that like hard water, and trying not to change water. It's not that you can't do it. People do it, but it can be tricky.
CO2 is more or less a personal choice. If you want plants to grow super full, super vibrant, super fast, add CO2. Yep, I agree. I actually had my 65-gallon here, and Tim saw it a couple times while he was over. And I was injecting CO2, and the plants grew so fast that I had to trim them almost twice a week. They were real full, real vibrant. Now, here's the catch. If you start running CO2, don't stop. If you stop running CO2, those plants are very reliant on the amount of CO2 that you're putting in, and you are now changing their environment. You're reducing the amount of CO2 available for them. So one, you're going to create an algae bloom because the plants aren't going to be processing the nutrients they have as well. So you're going to have excess nutrients, which causes algae. And the plants are basically then going to be starved out by the amount of algae that's going to come in. So your plants are going to wither away. So if you plan on running CO2 and then eventually want to stop, it's going to have to be a slow ramp in with the amount of CO2 that you're using, and then a very, very slower ramp out. That way your plants have time to adjust. Because if you just cold turkey stop, like what happened to me because my regulator stopped working and I didn't know, your plants are going to suffer quite extremely. You have anything on that, Tim?
No, I think you covered it all. It definitely is. I mean, and again, that part of that depends on the plants too. You can get some super full plants without CO2, but CO2 makes it easier. It makes it easier and quicker. And I think it's one of those, especially when people start off with plants, like you want that. Oh yeah, I want lots of plants. I want them to grow fast. And then you have them, and then you're like, I don't want to take care of them anymore. It's too much work. I got to trim them constantly. And the guy did a whole video on Pogostem Sloths octopus. I love that plant. Grows like crazy. And I pulled all of it out of my tank because I got so tired of having to trim it constantly. So it definitely is. Yeah, if you want that, go ahead. If you don't, and my guess is in the long term, unless you're really trying to do some, more difficult plants, my guess is a lot of you are not going to want CO2 long term.
Yeah, definitely. Fluval just came out with a spray bar for the FX series, just saying. So yeah, I've actually been reaching out to Fluval because I have the FX6 filter on my goldfish tank, and the output on that filter, even in 300 gallon, is quite extreme, to where the goldfish kind of stay away from the back right-hand corner of the tank. So I've basically limited myself to 250 gallons. Not that that's a small amount of water or anything like that. But I've actually been reaching out to try and get them to send me this FX spray bar so that I can review it for them and post the review on the channel. Because I probably have one of the few tanks that you could actually take that spray bar and run it instead of across the back of the aquarium, but along the side, because that 300 gallon is 3 feet front to back. And I believe their spray bar is 32 inches, so it would fit in there perfectly. And I would love to review it, but I can't find one to buy, and they haven't gotten back to me yet on if they would send me one. So yeah, I would love to see one because I kind of want one. I think it would work well in that tank. Nice to correspond, but also a battle for knowledge distribution. Good stream. I love it. Knowledge is priceless. Well, thank you guys for watching. Having you guys come out and actually participate in a stream makes it entertaining not only for us, but also for you guys. And the more people we can get here, the more interactive the stream becomes. And the more it grows, the more stuff we talk about. But it's always good having people that will have input into what we're talking about. Creates a good conversation. Here's one that's a little controversial that people talk about all the time. What if we just rinsed off the HOB cartridges? Would that leave some of the beneficial bacteria on it? If you have chlorine in your water, it's probably a better idea not to do that. But that being said, and I know I'm probably going to catch a lot of flack for this, if you have well water and you don't have any chlorine in it, you can rinse it off under the sink. The bacteria that is in your sponges and stuff like that, it's not all of it, right? So there's a good portion there, but most of it's going to be in your tank, on your decorations, in your substrate, on your plants, on your rocks, on your driftwood, on the glass. Probably 35 to 40% of it's going to be in your filter cartridge or in your filter media because of the surface volume that those pads have. So if you take that and rinse it off under sink, if you have well water with no chlorine in it, the bacteria is going to hold on to that pretty well, right? You're not going to lose a large majority of it. You'll probably lose a little bit, but you're not going to lose a ton. That being said, that is probably most of what I have always ever done. And sue me, but I've never had any issues with it. Now, if you have chlorine in your water, I'd be a little bit more lenient because they put that chlorine in your water to kill bacteria. That being said, if you're just rinsing it under there real quick, it's not going to kill everything off instantaneously. It's not that concentrated. It takes a little bit of time for it to kill it off. So you're going to lose a little bit more than if you were running it under well water, tap water. But it's possible you might catch flack for it, like I'm sure I will here. But yeah, it's doable.
I was gonna say, Travis, I actually do have city water, and I rinse off all of my filter or my sponges right in my city water, and I'm not worried about it. In all honesty, typically when I'm changing those, I'm also doing water changes. I'm adding the chlorinator to my water at that point, and if because of the way I do my water changes, I'm not dechlorinating the water before I put in there. So, I kind of feel like it's such a brief amount of time, and chlorine takes time to kill things. It's just like anything else. Like if you think about, like I've worked at places where I've had to do cleaning stuff, and we'd have to do like certain disinfectants where you had to leave them on the toilet for 15 minutes before you wiped them off. Well, why? Because it took time to kill stuff. And so I think there's so little chlorine in your, and I'm sure listen, I am sure there are places that have enough to kill it, but I think those are going to be few and far between. So I'm with you. I don't recommend doing what I do, but that's what I do.
Yeah, I agree. Don't do what I do. I just know it works for me. If you want the foolproof method, you can take some fish tank water when you're doing a water change, put it in a bucket, squeeze out your filter media in the bucket until it runs clear, put it back in your filter, and you'll be at 100% golden.
Yep, that's the safe way to do it.
You could do it if you want. Uh-oh. That's funny. I figured I would just put that one up there. That kind of gave me a chuckle. Let's see. I find it annoying that heaters are not correctly calibrated. Many run colder than they state. Yeah, and that's just the one thing about heaters. Like the quality control just isn't there. They're not going to take. So how they do it is they spot check, right? So they'll spot check as they're assembling them, like every 100 heaters. They'll pick one up. They'll test it to make sure it works, right? And then they put it back in the line. They're not testing it to make sure that it's coming up to temperature exactly. They're not making sure that it's going to have a certain amount of heat cycles. They're just testing to make sure that it works. And then probably 1 in every 1,000, they'll check to make sure that it's heating to the correct temperature. And that's where you get your variations. And a lot of the heaters that you see out there nowadays, they don't heat to the number that you set them to. And that's very common, which is why a lot of times, if you're running one aquarium, I would recommend that you guys invest in a thermostatic controller. What that's going to do is it's going to allow you to run your heater. And instead of, you can just set your heater to max, and then you can control your temperature with the thermostatic controller. And that'll also help prevent if you have runaway heater, where the heater just starts heating and doesn't stop heating. It will allow it to still technically work because the thermostatic controller is controlling the heater now instead of the thermostat inside of the heater. But yeah, many of them don't come 100% calibrated. And you think they would, but it's just, they're making so many of them that it would be hard to test every single one to make sure that they were all 100% right. You have any thoughts on that, Tim?
Yeah, that's exactly why I don't buy heaters that are specifically set to a temperature, because they definitely do not correctly calibrate them. And that being said, if they're somewhere close, they might be fine. I like to be able to control it a little more. But it goes back to like our fish can handle a lot more variety and temperature than we usually deal with. So I'm not too concerned about it, but I always buy the ones that are adjustable just because of that.
Yeah, preset heaters are tough, and like even if you go and look in like in the directions of the heater, right? Which it's a preset heater. Why does it have directions? You plug it in and it turns on. But if you actually go through and read the directions on those, most of them are preset to 76 to 78 degrees is what they claim, but they can have a 2-degree variation of that, which means that it could actually go 74 to 80. And that's a big range, right? If you're trying to get one specific temperature, you're not going to be able to achieve it with one of those. And I actually had one that I bought once just to test it out, and it was running 72 degrees. And I actually had to turn the temperature down in the room that it was in to see if it would even turn on. But it's just one of those things, like, they just aren't calibrated the way they should be, and that's just how it is. So you kind of have to find a workaround or have a secondary thermometer that you can check the temperature. And that's just the easiest way to do it.
I'm going to interrupt. I'll be right back. I'm going to run to the little boys' room because I'm drinking lots of fluids today, trying to beat this cold. So I'll be right back.
Yeah, that's fine. So I'll talk about this one while Tim's away because I know a little bit about this. Um, if we've discussed Matten filters. Now, if you're not really sure what a Matten filter is, which most people probably don't know because they're not super common, but they are quite effective. Matten filters are essentially like a sponge filter, but instead of having a round circular sponge, it is a flat sheet of sponge material. And there's a couple different ways you can run it. Most people choose to run it across one end of the aquarium. So if you have like this aquarium here, you would take that sheet of sponge material and you would cut it to fit the whole way across the aquarium from top to bottom, about here, right? And then you would have your substrate and your fish and your plants and driftwood and everything over here. And on this side, you would have a piece of PVC pipe that would come from the bottom. You would have your air line running into the bottom of that PVC. And you could drill a hole in the side of the PVC and tip it up, or just run the air line up the bottom, creating an air lift. Same principle as a sponge filter. And then you have that PVC pipe come up and through on a 90-degree angle back into the tank, basically the same way as a sponge filter does. And then instead of just having your little tiny sponge filter here, you have an entire wall for your filtration of sponge. So they work very well, and it's very, very rare that those plug up. They don't really have to be cleaned that much. They are, if you're looking at a breeding setup, Matten filters are pretty much the way to go. Pretty good stuff as far as filtration goes. We're just talking about Matten filters, Tim. Basically just like a sponge filter, but in sheet form instead of round, stick it in the back of the tank form.
Yeah, I actually have a Matten filter. I've never used one. I've thought about actually setting up a guppy breeding tank with them, where I'd put a Matten filter in the middle of it and put my breeding pair on one side, and then run my air from the one side to the other, and suck up the baby, the fry, whatever, into the other side. So, but I've never actually used one. But yeah, absolutely, you can use them, and they're definitely
they're good. Hey, Tim,
right, Travis,
this one's for you.
I got 15 more minutes, and then
yep, I think I do too, because I got to go pick up my daughter in 15 minutes. So.
All right. So
yeah, if it hits the 2-hour mark, we'll call
it. Yes, thank you, Andy. Yeah, I hit that 1,000 mark. Very exciting for me, and I appreciate you subbing. That's definitely is encouraging to me to have people sub, and it helps me just to continue to want to work on growing the channel and provide more information for you guys.
Yeah, and it's a really good feeling hitting that first 1,000. I know when I first started doing the channel, I didn't think I would ever get anywhere near like 100 subscribers, right? And here I am at 13,000, I think I'm at now, and it's just like I never thought I'd be this far. You know, I never thought I'd hit 100, and yeah. It's just a good feeling to be able to produce content that people enjoy and keep coming back for. And this is just in reference to the Matten filters. Inadvertently got your wish there.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, especially if you have tanks that are set up long ways instead of, if you have racks of tanks, I think they would definitely look better than some of those sponge filters. But I grow enough plants that for the most part you don't see most of my sponge filters, so that works too.
Yeah, me too. And if you have a black background, sponge filters are black, and if you get the ones with the suction cups, you can just stick them against the back and you'll probably never see them anyway. Can Amazon swords be cut back to its base? If you feel the need that you need to trim your Amazon swords, you want to take the outermost leaves that appear to be dying off and you can trim them up towards the base. Try not to cut too many off at the same time. You can put the plant into shock and then it just won't grow anymore at all, no matter how long you let it sit. I've had that happen once before, but if you're experiencing leaves dying off on your Amazon sword for unexplained reasons, chances are your sword plant is probably not getting enough nutrient, and it's actually taking the older leaves and consuming them to get the nutrients back out of those leaves to then turn around and use it to produce new leaves. So it's basically a way of self-maintaining if it's in a period of not having enough nutrients. But if you want to trim those leaves back for whatever reason, you can. Just don't do too many at once. Do a couple leaves, wait a couple weeks, do a couple more leaves if you want to trim it. Because, like I said, if you do too many, you can shock it. I'm from New York City, and my question is, what is the best hang-on back for aquarium filters? Do I buy the Chinese hang-on back because they're cheaper? Just want to know what to buy, and more power to your channel. If you were setting up a new aquarium, this is one of those tough questions because there's so many filters out there. I don't know what you currently have if you don't have anything. My favorite line of hang-on back filter is probably the Aqua Clears, right? But they're a little bit more spendy. And I'm probably going to catch flack for this one. The Tidal filters, I'm not a fan. I don't like the Tidal filters. If you want to try to breed fish, or if you breed fish, there's a lot of openings in those filters. Granted, they get good flow in and out, but there's so many openings that it's hard to cover them all to stop fry from getting sucked up. So therefore, I don't really like them for that reason. For anybody else, they're probably great filters. If you're looking at getting into a budget line of filter, I would go with the Marineland filters. They usually work pretty good. Don't use the cartridges, use sponge in place of those cartridges. And those filters will probably do you well for years. That's my opinion. For the longest time, I actually ran Tetra filters from Walmart and took sponges and put them in there because I think those filters, I think I was paying $15 for a 60-gallon rated filter, and ran them for years. And then if they got a little noisy because the impellers were getting worn out, you buy a $3 impeller, put it in it, and enjoy the next 3 years. So it's it's one of those things. How much money do you want to spend on what product you want to buy? They're all going to work about the same. They all do the same thing. They collect fish poop. So yeah, that's really up to you. Most of the time, I don't think I've ever personally seen or heard of, I'm not saying it hasn't happened, the electric motors dying, because that usually takes more years than what you have the aquarium set up for. So that being said, if you're looking to go budget minded, I'd probably go Marineland. If you don't really care too much and we just want to have something that works really good, I'd go Aqua Clear. If you decide that you don't want to hang on back, get a sponge filter.
Yeah, I am asked. I don't like a hang on back filter, so I have some, but even with the Aqua Clears, I've had issues with those with losing power, and then they drain out completely and fry the motors on me. So I've had that happen to me, and I don't know. I couldn't tell you there's one I actually like. So the Aqua Clear is nice because you can adjust and has a nice compartment there to throw in your filtration, and for me that's sponges. Sometimes I'll throw in some filter floss or something like that, but yeah, I don't like them, so I can't give you a good recommendation.
Yeah. My apologies if I offended you. Swords, tiger lilies, lots of plants I've just got, but not much stem plants, floating plants. Maybe I could be changing water too much. Nitrates are super low. Yeah, usually in a planted aquarium, you want to try and keep those nitrates in like the 30 to 40 range is a pretty healthy range. Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell because like you've got swords and tiger lilies are going to get most of your nutrients from the substrate. Do you seem like you're having more of an issue with your floating plants and water column feeding plants, or more your root feeding plants? Um, Yeah. Yeah, self-priming is tough because if you get an air pocket in your line, it's not going to be able to create the flow to prime. So they're kind of a pain. And the backflow, yeah, sometimes they're a pain in the butt to get primed. It is what it is. It's just the nature of how they are.
That's why I don't like hang-on-backs. That, they're noisy. You know, those impellers always end up making noise, or the lids end up rattling on them, or I don't know. There's just so many things I don't like about hang-on-backs.
Yeah.
It's not that. Maybe if I had one tank, I'd be okay with it. I would, give it the time it needs to upkeep it. But I think that's part of my problem is I don't like to upkeep it. So I'd rather just have sponge filters that I ignore. And when I want to get around to them every 6 months to clean them, they didn't get mad at me. They didn't make noise. They didn't quit working.
Yeah.
So it's.
Your Tetra strips have a CO2, an available CO2 strip. If that's saying that your CO2 is off the charts, I would suggest to you to get a CO2 drop checker and double check it to make sure that it actually is. Because if for some reason you have the miracle aquarium where you have all the CO2 in the world, the only other issue you would be having would be lack of nutrients. Other than that, that would be what I would do. I would double check your CO2 with a drop checker. If that still says you have a ton of CO2, then you're lacking in nutrients. That's essentially that. Yeah, and your fish have been healthy, so your CO2 probably isn't that high.
Yeah, I'm betting your test strips are not being honest with you, is my guess. And honestly, I didn't even know there was any test strips for CO2, so I don't know. I'm a little ignorant to that.
This new setup with a comment pop-up is cool. I'm liking it. Yeah, I like it too. This makes it a lot easier, especially with me and Tim not being sitting next to each other to look at the comments. I can bring it up on screen and we can both look at it. That and you guys actually have a better idea what we're talking about if I forget to read it. Yeah, it actually works out really well.
Yeah, and Travis and I live about an hour apart. So with gas prices the way they are, it definitely makes it a lot easier for us too. Because we like doing them together. We like to have a conversation with you guys, obviously. But it's just easier to carry on a conversation with a person that you're sitting with too. And so it makes it a lot easier for us to be able to do it this way as well, without having to spend a fortune in gas right now, because sure, all of you are hurting from gas prices. So this works out well for us.
Yeah. All right, guys, so we only got about 3 minutes left until we're at our max, so we'll answer a couple more questions here. Would you recommend a pea puffer tank? I've heard they're fussy eaters and sensitive to their environment. I've actually had a 29-gallon pea puffer tank. I had 8 pea puffers in there. Just keep a little bit of tannins in the water, feed them live bloodworms they really like, frozen they'll get used to. I try to keep a little bit of a small snail colony in there for them to munch on once in a while. They don't necessarily have problems with their beaks as much as other larger puffers do, but it's always good to have a little bit of snail in there to help them maintain that down. Never really had much of an issue with them. They're a pretty solid puffer.
Well, I think for you had ones that came from somebody else that were healthy. Because I've had pea puffers before as well, and you could just tell looking at them they were not healthy to begin with. They definitely are prone to internal parasites.
Yeah, so that is definitely one of the things. Internal parasites, if you get them, they're 95% of them, I'm going to say, are wild caught because they're very hard to breed in captivity. And if they're going to be wild caught, they're almost always going to have internal parasites. So that's definitely something that you're going to want to treat them for, and you're going to want to run them through a lot of quarantine, probably multiple times to get all of that out. Once you have them dewormed, they're fairly solid. Sure. This summer is probably about 5 months away from me. So we've already had our third winter. It's been 70 degrees and now we've got like an inch of snow on the ground over here. So Once everything comes back and is in full bloom, I'll show you the guys the garden pond, the 135-gallon one, and I also have the 1,000-gallon one that I have hooked up to the aquaponics system. I'm going to be doing videos on that too. But yeah, I'll definitely show you guys that.
What Travis is going through there, I'm just going to mention to you guys, for anybody who is in the Pennsylvania area, Keystone Clash, we are going to be there. I think that gets asked that every time we do a live stream. Are we going to be at Keystone Clash? We will be there this year. Both those are going. Travis, are you staying there overnight, or you heading home overnight?
I'm not sure yet.
Okay.
It's not super far from me, so it's probably like a 45-minute ride. So I might just come home and travel back and forth. It might make more. It depends on gas prices, honestly. Driving the truck, we'll see. It depends what it looks like when we get there. That's off in September, so we'll see what happens then.
Yes, in September is the Keystone Clash in Morgantown, Pennsylvania. I'm excited to be going there. I'll be staying down there for the weekend because my family lives down that way, so I'm pretty excited about that. And so before we get to that question, since I know you guys will ask, yep, I'll be there. Travis will be there. I'm thinking about putting some fish in the show. I don't know if Travis, if you've thought about that at all.
I'm thinking about entering my my Midas, my Red Devil, whichever one I want to put it in as. She's real pretty, real big, and I think she would probably do well in the show. I just have to find a way to transport her. I'm probably going to have to get like a 30-quart cooler and run a heater and find an inverter for my car that'll run a heater and be able to get her down there. But I'd love to enter her to see how she would do because she is really nice looking.
Yeah.
Let's see. So we're at the bottom of the chat here. We just got 2 more. We'll do 2 more questions, and then that will be it because I know we both got to run. 120-gallon tank with 8 discus. I was told by the pet store I need to add live plants. Water temp is 83 degrees. pH is 7.5. What plants are good for them? So here's the issue that you're going to run into, right? And this is something that we kind of talked about before a little bit. Generally speaking, with discus, you want to have low TDS, which is total dissolved solids, which is the amount of minerals and content makeup of your water. So if you have a low TDS, plants are kind of going to struggle because they don't have nutrients there for them to pick up. So it's kind of hard to base that off of what the pet store said. Most of the time when I see people with discus tanks, they usually just run stone and driftwood as their scape. They don't really run too many plants because of that issue. Now, if you know the discus you have were born and raised in water with a little bit of a higher TDS and actually had some mineral content in it and are used to that, then I would probably just go with your basic easy beginner plants, your swords, your crypts, your Anubias, things like that. Because you got to remember that they are, they're going to rip that up a little bit. They do get a little bit aggressive diving in and out of the plants. So that's kind of what I would do. Check your TDS in your water, see what you're currently running. And if they're accustomed to something with a little bit more nutrients, then try plants, but plants might get a little beat up.
Yeah, I would try some Anubias. That'd be what I'd go with there. I would go with the Anubias barteri, the Anubias nana barteri, and the Anubias coffeefolia, and that'll give you 3 plants that'll probably have the, one of the better chances of doing well in there. And with the coffeefolia, you'll get a little bit of color in there as well. So, but yeah, all the stuff that Travis says is absolutely true. You're going to struggle with that, but those would be the ones I would try.
What do you guys think about the Hikari freeze-dried tube effects worms?
I like them.
Yeah, they're a good treat, in my opinion. So I would rather go with a frozen food before a freeze-dried food. A lot of the freeze-dried foods that are out there, the curing process that they have to go through, you lose a lot of your nutrients out of them. So they're not ideal. They're not terrible, you know, but they're not really an ideal. If you're trying to feed some kind of tubifex worm or a black worm or something like that, try to find a live culture first. If not, try and find a frozen source for foods. If not, freeze dried works. It's probably about as good as any other flake food or anything like that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think part of the problem with the freeze dried food is getting enough to them because this stuff's expensive. And so, you know, if you only have one tank, then yeah, you can get away with it. You can feed them enough that they'll get enough nutrients and everything. But that's the problem with freeze dried food. But I like the tubifex worms especially. Um, I like to stick it on my grass or on the front glass and watch my guppies fight over it.
Yep. All right, guys. So we've hit the 2 hour mark, which is like an hour longer than I thought this was ever going to go, which is not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. It's good to have people around and be able to talk and communicate, and talk fish. So, like Spandog says here, thank you guys for the stream. Well, thank all of you guys for being here. Tim, thank you for joining me. Like we always do, we're probably going to try and do a stream once a month at least. Now that we have this option here, it may be more frequently, since we can do streams like this. Plus, this seems to work out pretty good with all the pop-ups and everything that we can get in here of all the comments. And you guys seem to have enjoyed it too. So, as always, thank you guys for watching Trapfish Aquatics. Links for all the products that we use and recommend in the description down below. And I will see you guys in the next video. Any closeouts, Tim?
Make sure you hit the subscribe button. If you're still here at 2 hours, you better subscribe to Travis's channel. You better come over to my channel and hit that subscribe button on my channel. We'd appreciate it, guys, if you would. If not, it's all right too.
All right, so we'll see you guys in the next video. I do have videos pending and coming out this Friday, as well as I'm going to hope to try every Friday after that, but we'll see what happens. Life is a crazy thing. So for now, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next video.